especially with the current silver environment, where yesterday we saw the rare feat known as silver rallying 2 days in a row. Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. On Saturday, October 2nd, wasn't quite feeling too well yesterday to get a video out, but did want to update you on the latest happenings now that we are in October, start of the U.S. corporate fiscal calendar. And seems like a lot is happening. Again, I would not expect your elected or otherwise public officials to let you know that it is happening. Maybe that dog will have a better chance of telling us the truth than Nancy Pelosi and Jamie Dimon. But that's why we have this video coming your way, which I might add is sponsored by Summa Silver and the great Yellen McNamara, where they recently intersected 1,699 grams per ton silver equivalent over 4.3 meters, including 9,989 grams per ton silver equivalent over 0.6 meters at the Hughes property in Tonopah, Nevada, which they have been increasing. And didn't get Yellen this week, but hopefully next week for an update. And especially with the current silver environment, where yesterday we saw the rare feat known as silver rallying 2 days in a row. Now, I have not gotten confirmation. Ross, the boss of the CFTC, he did not text me and let me know if he had gone on an early October vacation or if he's locked up at the moment. Who really knows? I only have cryptic communications with the CFTC, although we're getting closer to getting the legal folks activated. There's been a lot going on, but maybe they speak Ross's language a little more clearly, and we'll see how that goes. But in either case, after quite a shocking change in the supply and demand profile on Wednesday that dropped the price of silver about, let's call it 80, 90 cents there over the span of a few hours, somehow the supply and demand profile radically changed. Actually, not somehow, very specifically how, because this is the paper supply and demand profile. And if you understand how much paper the banks are going to write or cancel out, then you actually can get a very good understanding. Now, unfortunately, the LBMA doesn't publish this until months after they've broken the law. I guess some of them attempt to make the assertion that they're within the law. That's not a law I'd want to teach to my kids, even if it is legal. But whichever way you slice it, see the price rallied right back up. I am quite confident if you checked Rosty's CFTC trade data, you would see the customers who got stopped out, probably customers of the same banks like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, who short futures on the COMEX, even when it is expressly forbidden by their own prospectus and illegal in a variety of ways to do so. But you might well find that they bought at the bottom. They probably jerked this rally back up higher. And I'm sure Transparent Ross will be updating us with his silver manipulation investigation soon, especially since it began on February 1st, one day before the price of silver fell 10% on the greatest day of silver demand in known human planet history. So I'm sure anytime we'll get an update on that. But until then, I suppose what stood out to me about this one was, I was proud of myself that I was buying down here this time. Maybe a little bit there, but no one's perfect. I mean, we're starting to see some patterns emerge here, although, well, that was not surprising. What was to see the second day of silver up 30 or 40 cents. Let's see, they marked it 16.52, 36 cents, let's call it. Don't remember that happening too often. I mean, we saw back during Silver Squeeze, there were a couple of days in a row where it was up quite a bit. But often, you know, if you see silver up one day, you're usually going to wait at least another day or a few before that happens again. What this means, I guess we'll find out. I wonder what has changed behind the scenes now that it is October 1st. Start of the new U.S. corporate fiscal calendar. And we will dig into some of the clues that I am noticing and thinking about. I don't know if there's a set answer to that one, but at least these are the things that I will mull over as we get closer Current date for the U.S. Running out of fraudulent extraordinary measures by Janet Yellen is now moved to October 18th. Now, why anyone would believe anything that comes out of that woman's vile mouth is something that I am unable to calculate. But she did mention on September 22nd to the Honorable Nancy Pelosi, I must be confusing her with someone else, Treasury letterhead, they had 6 former secretaries of Treasury explain the catastrophe if you're not demagogue and stiff-armed at threat of a vaccine that has stuff in it that I'll bet even the president wouldn't knowingly take, although that could explain his behavior if he had. Of all the things that you're being forced in, let's be clear with our language, I apologize, not being forced, given the appearance of high pressure and coercion like government does, they're selling this debt ceiling whopper pretty hard. So again, let's get the names clear. Hank Paulson, Geithner, Summers, Rubin, Blumenthal, Jacob Blue. On September 22nd, even a short-lived default could threaten economic growth. It creates the risk of roiling markets and of sapping economic confidence, and it would prevent Americans from receiving vital services, aka printed government money. It would be very damaging to undermine trust in the full faith and credit of the United States, and this damage would be hard to repair. I think that damage has been done a long time ago. Although short of actual default, even delaying resolution until default is imminent can be detrimental. Now, I guess this was targeted towards the debt ceiling, although I was reading the CNBC articles on Thursday that the government was hours away from a shutdown, unless Nancy Pelosi did, who knows what Nancy Pelosi did to resolve that one. Must have pulled some strings. Now, I'm sure she wouldn't do something and then let Paul Pelosi, the option legend, trade on it before you and I find out, but in either case, they're saying short of actual default, even delaying the resolution. So even if there's the perception that anyone in the market could be concerned, which really anyone who's been paying attention has been concerned for decades, but even that can be detrimental. So, but hey, I'm just one guy on YouTube. I am not a market influencer like Hank Paulson, who is not only the CEO of Goldman Sachs, the same institution of some of the former Fed governors who are now under investigation for front-running their own monetary policy. Oops. Or Tim Geithner, who had a hard time paying his taxes. I wonder if the IRS would present him as a model. He was Treasury Secretary. But after these guys had those background, and these guys have spectacular backgrounds as well, I'm just, you know, I'm a little younger than some of your average silver investors, so I'm more familiar with these, but we'll see if the IRS would advocate Geithner as an example of what to follow. But here we see, you know, after learning that even the appearance of debt ceiling problems could be a catastrophe, has that condition been met? Well, according to CNBC, here are the changes that could be coming to your Social Security benefits. I don't know why that would pop up now, because while debt ceiling talks have put Social Security payments in the news, I guess somebody must be concerned. One topic that's been on the back burner is a deadline Congress faces to shore up the program, because Social Security's trust funds for retirement and disability benefits are projected to be able to pay only 78% of the promised benefits by 2034. Right around the corner, especially if you're 53 years old or something like that. To fix that, Congress could consider several completely fraudulent attempts to reconcile the issue. The debt ceiling debate has sparked conversation about whether Social Security payments will still go out on time. Sounds like someone's concerned. Well, benefit checks will still go out. Just 78% of the promised benefits will be payable. That doesn't sound good. Of a Congress that needs to adjust the program's 75-year deficit. So as you can see, this didn't just start happening now. This has been going on and overlooked by both Democrats and Republicans for a long time. Currently, benefits are subject to federal taxable income if your combined income exceeds certain thresholds which will not keep up with the true cost of living since the CPI formula is massively rigged to screw Social Security benefits. In fact, a little sidebar here, if I may. During the last debt ceiling debate, one of my favorites, the only proposal I heard, aside from the $1 trillion coin, was that former President Obama actually advocated changing the CPI formula. He actually said this. He was going to change the CPI formula as a means of deficit reduction, which basically meant they were going to tweak the formula further to make inflation look lower than it actually is so that they can screw the people that have built the country, and so that Janet Yellen can take their money out of their retirement accounts. That's actually documented in her letter from the Treasury when she explains the extraordinary fraudulent measures that are being used to keep the government running at all at this point, because they've already passed the limit and now they have to do off-balance sheet things that they learned from Enron, which maybe George Bush, who was friends with Ken Lay, and the Bin Laden family all studied together in their energy planning. Who really knows? Although interesting, here's Larry Kotlikoff, professor of economics at Boston University, and he was explaining a few things. Although it's interesting, they didn't ask him about my favorite question, which this was about 2 or 3 years ago, because he had a report that if you actually did a non-fraudulent accounting on Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security, the unfunded liabilities then were already over 200 trillion. God only knows what that has gone up to now. But of course, the political solution is to just tax your money even more. So this is your retirement Social Security, but they can raise, what if they decide for the good of the country, they have to raise it to 100%. That would probably not be good. But here's President Joe Biden has proposed reapplying the Social Security payroll tax for wages above 400,000. So when Joe talks about funding a lot of these plans that end up always getting funded with more printed money, one of the other means of deficit reduction is to take more of your tax money, which I would say is completely fraudulent. Yet at least, you know, if it were being used to actually retire debt or something with honor and a good intention, maybe you could stomach it, but we know that is not going to happen with these guys. You have to have a good idea whether you're reasonably on track, even with full Social Security benefit. And then the second step would be to say, how would it impact me specifically if I experience a benefit cut? Well, I actually did try to cash out my Social Security benefits a couple of years ago when I was living in Denver. And I remember at one family outing, I tried selling my future payment streams. I tried to securitize it in like a CDO to my brother for $100. He said yes initially, then backed out. So I think he thought through the US government math. So Social Security seems at least a little concerned, although, hey, why count on those old geezers when you have JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon cautions a US default would be potentially catastrophic. Goodness. Country's largest lender has already begun scenario planning for how a US credit default would affect the repo and money markets, as well as client contracts and capital ratios. Those are obviously third, fourth, and last. Fortunately, Jamie's got experience. It's his third time doing it. But let's go back here, the repo and money markets. I still don't fully grasp. Maybe I'll study that next week. The whole breaking the buck with the money market thing. But of all the things Wall Street has done, that seemed like that was really the one that scared the shit out of them the most. Of course, you have Paul Kanjorski back in 2008 telling about how they were moments, hours away from the end of the financial system. And it sounds like Jamie Dimon thinks it's at least possible. And given now we're on October 2nd, and I don't think a deal has been reached. I mean, that would seem like we're getting that condition of it even being possible. It's the third time we've had to do it. Every time it comes up, gets fixed, but we should never get this close. It's all politics. You figure. Powell and Yellen warn of economic crisis if debt ceiling isn't raised. So they sound concerned. But congressional Democrats are scrambling to find a way. Democrats had hoped to avoid a partial government shutdown and suspend federal debt ceiling with a single vote, but they were blocked. So it seems like there's some opposition. I won't get into the dynamics of that. I'm sure you'll hear plenty about that in the next couple of weeks. Because to keep on a more positive note, there is racial equality being promoted by Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan as they're boosting their presence in the underserved communities. Kumbaya to that is all I will say there. Following nationwide Black Lives Matter protests last year, JP Morgan, out of the goodness of their Luciferian heart, pledged $30 billion over 5 years. I mean, they must be making a lot in that silver market. 30 billion. I mean, even for JP Morgan, that often steals money directly from the country, that's a few bucks. But then when I was thinking, well, how could they fulfill such a noble pledge? Then we see that basically this includes originating 40,000 new mortgages, 15,000 small business loans to get Black and Latino communities indebted to this cult called JP Morgan, similar to what John Perkins discussed in great detail in his book, The Economic Hitman. Now that showed more of a CIA hidden government level of going out, stiff arming foreign countries to sign up for some sort of deal that would leave them in great amounts of debt and force their leaders to do the bidding of the US corporate war machine. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, what's he talking about now? Although a little story to back that one up. When I was living in Greece in 2013, this was after they had their financial issues, 2012. And one of my friends there, because I was asking about those riots that had happened, and he said everything was peaceful until a bunch of guys showed up. They had masks. They were speaking to each other in French. And they were the ones who antagonized the guards, and then violence broke out after that. I'm sure if anybody's been watching those Antifa videos up in Portland would be able to associate with that. So anyway, now we're going to get JP Morgan to hook Black and Latino communities on their stolen fraudulent government credit. Biden's acting comptroller of the currency, Michael Sue, love to meet. I actually would not like to meet him. Said he would scrap contentious changes to fair lending laws by his Trump-appointed predecessor and start a fresh review with other banking regulators. Maybe that's what Ross has been busy doing. Maybe Gary Gensler will be there too. Sounds like a big meeting, so we will stay tuned there. Of course, just when you think the news couldn't get better, here's JP Morgan buying college financial aid platform Frank to deepen the ties with the students. I don't remember the last time I've been this touched on a Saturday morning. Look at all the beauty in the world. And somewhere on the other side of that sunset, JP Morgan is going to deepen the ties with today's finest academics. Frank is an online portal with tools that help students apply for and negotiate financial aid, more government credit. So if they can't extend the debt ceiling, then they'll just say, hey, well, if you care about your kids going to college, this is who's really going to suffer. So anyway, we won't dig too deeply through that. I'm sure Jen Roberts is going to get children age 6 to 17 who may eventually benefit from using Frank, hooked on Frank. I hear that shit's worse than smack. And the bank hopes users will sign up with Chase for their first checking account, completing a virtual circle of JP Morgan Chase services that can defile someone's life throughout their career. So there you go with Frank. Today is my first day employed by someone else ever. It's a fantastic place to be. And I couldn't find a better and bigger platform to be working to further. Well, I would say this. I'll bet if she had not worked for JP Morgan Chase, maybe it followed her passion, come up with something she enjoyed, made a product, sold it to a lot of people, and then retired on the beach, then she wouldn't have to work further in the mousetrap wheel that many Americans are put on through the inflationary printing press that JP Morgan helps out. But of course, you're wondering, where is all that money going to come from? Unfortunately, starting October 1st, that's yesterday, so that means in fair game, students can apply for their share of $150 billion in college aid. And here's how. So basically, there's 150 billion stolen out the back FAFSA door. October 1st, incredibly important when it comes to paying for college, because FAFSA is the gateway, but who's paying for FAFSA? So actually, you're paying for that. Discover is going to get some basis points off it. Jamie Dimon's going to get a lot of basis points off it. And they're going to say that inflation is coming down. That's right. You actually did hear the man posing as Joe Biden claim that. Sally Mae's report. I remember they were a deal stock when I was first trading, which fell apart. Not a good day for Chris's P&L in 2007. Yet I'm sure they're going to need some basis points out of that. So how much does it actually cost to get $150 billion in college aid, where you can teach people things that I've taken a decade to unlearn? And anyway, seems like that is going well. But even better, Jamie Dimon is a true leader with all the things he's able to keep up with, because he warns it's possible the Fed could be forced into a sharp move next year. I mean, they can't always be proactive. Sometimes they're going to have to be, every once in a while, they got to react. But Dimon said if those hot inflation figures continue into December, the U.S. policymakers, they finally might have to admit that at least part of the price increases are here to stay. Now, I don't know, maybe if we double Jerome Powell's home price, I heard he is long real estate. And now we got to let him finish the investigation into Rosengren and Kaplan. And there's a new one before he investigates himself. But, you know, these are all sorts of factors. Could the Fed announce a taper this week? I will stand by my claim that whether it's the Fed or the government, when you go through all these little things that they hope you don't notice, they've already begun tapering. Because let me ask you this. Why else are bond yields rising? Who is it that all of a sudden just changed their mind and doesn't want to reinvest? Well, if the Fed was basically buying everything already and the bond yields just shot up, I would put my 2 ounces on it being somewhere in that Federal Reserve Treasury complex. Now, it's hard to know who's who because Janet Yellen's on both sides. Jerome Powell, I learned the other day, used to be a Treasury official. The accounting isn't as transparent as Ross Benham of the CFTC would probably advocate. And of course, Powell has argued that this spike in prices is transitory. Steve Leisman, always at the top of things, we'll leave that. Inflation, to me, it looks like there's a part that's transitory and there's a part that's not. Debt ceiling increases, they do not appear to be transitory, but hey, we could just look at the key inflation gauge. Now, this isn't the silly CPI one. This is the one that the Federal Reserve looks at the most, called the core PCE, I believe is the name. Yes, core PCE price index. This is, you know, the one for the professionals. Core inflation rose 3.6% in August from a year ago, the biggest jump in more than 30 years. Now, that number might not be as big as the headline CPI 5.4 number, but this says the biggest jump in 30 years, which would at least be in conflict with Jerome Powell's belief that inflation will be transitory. Ran at a fresh 30-year high in August, and we're not talking about like earlier this year, in August. As supply chain disruptions and extraordinarily high demand fueled ongoing price pressures. Sounds kind of like the silver market. I wonder if silver is in the CPI. That would be an interesting one to think about. Core personal consumption expenditure price index, which of course excludes food and energy, which is probably what makes the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, increased 0.3% for the month. It was up 3.6% from a year ago. Higher than even Dow Jones thought. That's the highest since 1991 when the U.S. was going to war. Hey, even Powell said he finds it frustrating. Well, I think a lot of his constituents do. Well, he doesn't have constituents, I suppose, but I think a lot of the people that are on the other end of those dollars that he keeps printing out and is baffled about this inflation effect. Now he's getting frustrated. It's kind of like when Bernanke didn't understand gold. None of them know it. They just shoot off the weapons of financial mass destruction anyway, and just hope it'll be okay. It's a good plan. Rise in inflation came as personal income increased 0.2% for the month. So it seems like prices of the things you buy were going up faster than income. But that is a very strong economy in Wall Street parlance. Also, consumer sentiment improved according to the University of Michigan index, which rose to 72.8%. Oh, I don't know anyone who's not confident. Actually, I do. That's not true. But Eurozone inflation also hits highest level in 13 years as energy prices soar. So perhaps it's not one random outlier. Again, as you saw earlier, U.S. auto sales forecast to plummet in the third quarter as chip shortages plague the industry. Severe decline, including a massive fall in September. Now, we've been hearing about this for months. And now there's a massive fall even relative to what's already happened. Now, in a market that wasn't propped up with a lot of printed money, you would think that there would be a massive fall in the stock decline. I think we will still see that. Just my forecast, not licensed economic financial advice. Although one of the reasons I say something like that, here Edmunds expects General Motors and Ford to have the largest third quarter sales declines of 31.5% and 29.3%. So if the two largest automakers are losing about 30% of their sales, what does that mean for the stock market? What does that mean for Joe Biden's green plan? What does that mean for earnings? What does that mean for the health of the economy? I have my answers. I've been saying them. They're different than the government answers. So U.S. auto sales are expected to nosedive in September. Forecasts from all these guys, including 24 to 26% fall, is due to ongoing semiconductor shortages. Well, how is that working out? Not so good. From chips to ships, shortages are making inflation stick. So another data point in contrast to Jerome Powell, soaring gas prices, staff shortages, a lack of ships. Central bankers, while they're adamant inflation will subside, are starting to concede it might stay higher for longer as a range of issues push up the prices of goods and services and lift future inflation expectations. Now, we've heard many central bankers talk about how it's not really the inflation that matters, it's the expectations. Well, I mean, once that 99-cent bag of Doritos went up to $1.49 and there were less chips in the bag, my expectation inflations were higher as well. Fortunately, similar to when the internet went down several times this week, which I hear has been happening in different portions of the globe, I take this as a blessing to detox off of things like cell phones and Doritos. But anyway, here, more evidence may stay higher for longer as a range of issues push up the prices of goods and services and lift future inflation expectations. Although there is one offsetting factor that we will get to. Their conclusions will ultimately determine how quickly policymakers unwind trillions of dollars in monetary stimulus unleashed to ease the COVID-19. Now, I don't think it's these conclusions. I think it's that this Ponzi scheme has run out of money that will force that, but surprised by inflation, of course. Chipflation, we'll leave that one aside, continue on. Get close to wrapping up here. But I just thought it was interesting, you know, with all this debt ceiling going on, you wonder why there has been more progress. But here, Janet Yellen participating in productive virtual meeting with her G7 finance minister counterparts to improve the international tax system. Then here, Treasury sanctions Sinaloa cartel members operating in Sonora. Well, that's interesting. Mexican cartel, which I'm sure has no affiliation to the Bush or Clinton cartels that were running large amounts of cocaine out of Mena, Arkansas, while in office, no less. But if this is a Mexican cartel operating in Mexican, wow, no wonder Janet Yellen is busy, because this is a poly drug smuggling operation responsible for transportation and importation of illicit drugs, methamphetamine, heroin, fentanyl. And seems like with all that money thrown at the DEA, they have either been participating in it or not been able to stop it. I'm not sure. I'm not inside there. But then here, Janet Yellen, it call with Italian Minister of Economy and Finance. They discussed the importance of advancing global tax reform. How exciting. Then at the end, Secretary Yellen thanked Minister Franco for the close cooperation between the US and Italian teams and his dedication to this effort. I mean, that's what really counts. Hear the garbage truck going by to take that trash out. So anyway, again, here was the latest letter from Janet to Congressional leadership on the debt limit. We now estimate that the Treasury is likely to exhaust its extraordinary measures if Congress has not acted to raise or suspend the debt limit by October 18th. I'd take that one with a grain of salt, but just to keep you updated, that is the new date that she is selling. Another thing, maybe you can look this one up in your own time. If you don't Google it, but if you DuckDuckGo LIBOR transition, then click on the news tab. So remember that whole LIBOR fraudulent thing that you heard about a couple of years ago? Apparently that was another thing snuck in on this October 1st deadline. Some parts on January 1st. Now, there's some are a little farther out because they're tied to Basel IV. I know you're thinking Basel III was enough for me. Here we go. A long way to go on LIBOR transition as key deadline nears. End of 2021 could prove hectic as bankers scramble to implement changes and explain them to commercial borrowers. CLO's near record run risks faltering on LIBOR transition chaos. That's 2 days ago. Synthetic LIBOR proposal would minimize near-term risk for UK RMBS. Now, we won't get into the minutia of that today, except if we find out that Jerome Powell now starts selling the REITs, REIT, Real Estate Investment Trusts, that are in his portfolio, according to an article I read, that were also securities that the Federal Reserve bought during their effort to save us from COVID, somehow buying mortgage-backed securities. Actually, I have a new theory. If the Fed bought a mortgage-backed security for every man, woman, and child on the planet, I believe that could be even more effective against COVID than a Pfizer vaccine. I'm not sure, just something I've heard. That's clearly not legal trading advice, but if you want to have some fun and see some of the dorky details about stuff, LIBOR law will help reduce disruption for U.S. structured finance. I'd take the other half of that one. Deadlines may be extended. Well, Ross the boss did make some announcements on that. He didn't share too loudly. Although looks like Biden will get to name replacements to most of the Fed voting board members in the first year as another one bites the dust. Clarita, I didn't even know there was a Clarita, traded into stocks on eve of Powell pandemic statement. Disclosures show transactions as COVID-19 fears spread. He says they were pre-planned rebalancing. That sounds like a joke to me. We will leave that aside. Lastly, here is Biden rallying support for social spending as House Democrats delay infrastructure vote. A lot of silly stuff. Infrastructure bill, which puts more than $500 billion of new money into transportation, broadband, and utilities. I don't understand why the private sector can't handle those, especially with this transportation. I know I'm going to upset a few people here, but back when I lived in Denver, I drove probably closer to 10, but at least 5 times to California and back, at least 2 or 3 times to New Jersey and back. And usually the only place where I found a big problem with the roads was when they put those cones on the side. Nobody was working there, but it created a traffic jam, probably created a large bill for the taxpayers on those. But I mean, I've driven through Mexico, through the US, and I'm not saying there aren't roads that could be repaired, but why they need $500 billion in there when they're facing the debt ceiling limit, that seems a little confusing. Actually, it's not confusing at all because they're stealing the money. That's how it goes. In fact, when you think about those cones that are out the side of the highway, you'd be paying $20 for it. You'd be paying $20 million per cone. The guy stamping the receipts, getting some basis points on it too. Seeing how these things work, just watch Goodfellas and the Godfather trilogy, and then turn CNBC's political coverage back on. It will make perfect sense. But as I promised earlier, I said, how is it? You keep hearing Silver Chris say, they already started tapering. Now, again, we have Janet Yellen on both ends of the Fed and the Treasury. So, and then you can believe what you want. This is just my belief, but let's take a look here. Biden told House Democrats that in order to find a compromise with centrist senators, they may have to agree to a final bill that costs from 1.9 to 2.3 trillion, down from the proposed 3.5 trillion. Now, I've heard a number as low as 500 billion, which is the number we saw up top as well. But that's 3.5 trillion that the market's already rallied on. It's already theoretically been priced in, at least if we had anything remotely resembling an efficient market hypothesis in action. So if you go from 3.5 trillion to 2 trillion or to 0.5 trillion, that's money that these guys already promised that, hey, without this money, you don't have jobs, you don't have COVID, you don't have this or that. So even Nancy Pelosi's not asking for 3.5 trillion anymore. Does she just all of a sudden care about deficit reduction? Does this get the debt ceiling passed? That seems hard to me to believe, especially knowing that her husband also front runs a lot of these policies. I would call that a taper myself. And if you hit the subscribe button, notification bell, I'll put more details on that one as we go forward. Manchin has set a 1.5 trillion asking price for the plan, less than half of the 3.5 trillion. So that could be 2 trillion now that they thought they had, that the markets have already rallied on. So if the new deal comes out and that money isn't there, that could be considered a taper. Who knows what it comes out to? Maybe Janet Yellen will come on the show soon and answer some of these questions. They remain hopeful the House will come together in a spirit of bipartisanship. If I ever get elected president, I think my first rule after dissolving every alphabet agency is that I'd make a new rule. You're allowed to pelt whoever says it with a water balloon when they say something is stupid and offensive to anyone who's paid these taxes for these fraudulent psychopaths to do the disturbing stuff they do. They talk about their spirit of bipartisanship. You guys have been using that bullshit for however many years. It's pretty disgusting. And you expose yourself as a complete con artist when you do it. Although through all of this, I do see great things coming out on the other side, because I look at this, my interpretation is that these guys are scrambling. I see anecdotal signs. They're turning on each other. Well, we've been going for a while today, so I'll let you can agree or not agree, but neither case deserves the support of strong both parties. Yeah, good luck with that. Fortunately, to end the show on a happier note, though, is that as all this stuff is unfolding, now we saw silver rise in price twice, 2 days in a row this week. So nice end to the week, especially as Silver Chopper Ben is getting ready for liftoff. We have the first two made. One's a bit bigger than the other. I think there's a photo maybe of them on the scale here. But as I think some people have heard, the propellers do spin. Very important feature. I do not have details of when they will be available. They came out, apparently it was a little more expensive to make than I had anticipated. I believe that's the smaller chopper, Ben. So we're going to figure out all of that stuff in due time. I'm learning to accept life goes on the schedule that it does. But again, I would say my parting thought here, something I've been thinking about a lot this week, where I don't know that I can control the day that the silver price finally moves. I've never been more confident that it will eventually move than I am now. So there's nothing has changed that. But really, the best that I can make out of all of this is that, well, if I do think the price is going to go higher, then while the emotional part of me may wish it were today or yesterday, if the price does go higher and there we are in the middle of a reset, which I believe we are, say the price of silver was $100 or $200, or, you know, let's say it went Bitcoin and was in the thousands. In hindsight, you know, let's say 5 years from now, I would probably look back and say, well, you know, I had to check my emotions. I had to learn new levels of patience within me that were beyond whatever I thought. And I get it. A lot of people have been waiting for a while. I've been in this since 2009. I can't imagine the people who've been watching silver since the 80s or even before and saw this coming, but they are out there. And yes, I understand when you wake up and you're hoping that today is the day and you see silver 80 cents or $1 lower. It's not always the most pleasant, cuddly feeling initially, but I just do my best to continue to look at those as opportunities to get better at handling pressure, get better at exemplifying patience, and everything I've ever studied through my own trading career, or any of the books I've read. I've been reviewing some of those market wizards books with some of the greatest traders on the planet, and they all say the same thing. Sometimes the best thing you do is make your decisions and then go hit the beach, which is what I am about to do now. So with that said, we will wrap up. Again, thank you to Summa Silver, who is digging silver out of Nevada, getting some great drill readings so far. And again, hoping to have Galen McNamara of Summa Silver back on the show next week to give us an update. Also share what he is seeing on the supply side, where I'm sure these higher prices for commodities and chips and all sorts of other things that are in shortages has not made that easier. At the same time, these are all the forces converging on the silver market. How long exactly it will take, we'll find out, but that is why at least I feel good about my silver holdings when I sleep at night. And again, obviously you need to decide what is most appropriate and right for you, but hopefully this video was helpful. Gonna wrap up myself for this weekend. We will have a tour of a silver mine on the channel tomorrow, so that'll keep you cozy until the open. Hopefully it'll be a fun one this Sunday. So with that said, go out, take a break from silver, go enjoy something out in nature. I will do the same, and I will see you again soon.